Oh, hi there. Welcome to my home in the Front Range of Colorado. My name is Karla Dakin, and I'm a landscape architect. The name of my company is K. Dakin Design. And I recently co-authored a book entitled The Professional Design Guide to Green Roofs. I'm here today, well, virtually here, with my colleague Andrew Clements in Athens, Greece. And we'd like to talk to you about the tale of two cities, Waterwise green roof design in arid climates. I'd also like to extend our thanks to Linda and Aramis for inviting us to join you today. We really appreciate the opportunity. I hope that you enjoy.
Hello from a very wet Athens, Greece. My name is Andrew Clements and I'm involved in green roof activism and research and development of green roofs in this arid region. Today Karla Dakin from Denver and I would like to talk to you about our interest and experience in water-wise green roofing in our similarly arid cities. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Linda and Aramis for the invitation to speak at the virtual conference. We hope you enjoy our talk.
Well, hi there. Here we are, Karla Dakin and Andrew Clements. We're having a conversation about water-wise design from Athens and Denver, the tale of two cities. We wanted to start out our slideshow by talking about where we come from and what it means in our design process. The first slide that we have up is of the foothills outside of Denver, Colorado. It's a Ponderosa pine ecosystem. Denver is really at the edge of the Great Plains. It's considered an arid prairie where we only get 14 to 16 inches of precipitation. That includes snow a year. It's a climate of harsh temperature extremes, high winds, and we have snow in the winter. Most of our precipitation is in March and April, and the soils are very gravelly and rocky. It's a tough climate to garden in from the beginning. Andrew, do you want to tell us a little bit about Athens? I'll change the slide.
Yes, certainly. Athens is similar in many ways to Denver and different in others. As you can see from the slide that's being shown now, we have in Athens primarily what's known as a garrigue ecosystem. And the same is true all over Greece, actually, which is a very rugged, aromatic, a lot of aromatic herbs in a garrigue landscape, and also plants like pistachia, pines, home oaks, and that sort of thing. It's a very rugged, dry ecosystem. We also have the other extreme of climate in Athens. It can snow. It has snowed this year, and we can have sub-zero temperatures. So we can have very long, arid summers and also very cold winters. So in some ways similar to Denver, but also different in other ways.
Right. So the next slide, I think one thing that informs me about my design process, creating green roofs in an arid climate, are the different plant communities that surround me in Colorado and the Western Rockies. This is a picture of the Pawnee Buttes, which is a prairie ecosystem in northeastern Colorado. And the prairie offers a multitude of possible plants that we can put in green roofs. And I certainly have learned a lot from studying the prairie and from the plants that inhabit it. Andrew, do you want to talk about the next slide?
Yes, so this is a classic example of a garrigue landscape that you can see here. You can see lots of sort of very stunted shrubs, olive trees, pistachia, as we said, and aromatic herbs, lots of things like thyme and lavender, rosemaries, and also wild flowers, things like cyclamens and irises and that sort of thing. Very rugged landscape, very dry, as we said. We can have up to 9 months drought in Athens. And this has also, like Karla was saying in Denver, this has informed really what we do on roofs in Athens and also all over Greece. So what we did was we actually studied this particular ecosystem and we tried to mimic it on roofs in Athens. And then in other places as well, even sort of more arid places like Crete, for example, which is much further south actually than Athens. and we found that it worked. So another thing to say about a garrigue landscape is that there's very little soil, as you can see. It's very the bedrock is, sort of, there are a lot of outcrops, and there's very little soil, in fact. So a lot of the plants are actually growing in the rocks.
Andrew, what's your average? Andrew, what's your average precipitation?
It's 400 millimeters, so 40 centimeters.
Interesting. So very, very low. Similar low precipitation. Another ecosystem that we're really looking at in terms of plant material for green roofs is our alpine ecosystem. And certainly not only in Colorado, but all over the world. There are a lot of plants that I've experimented with that grow in alpine climates. And you can see, like Andrew's garrigue ecosystem, the soil is very, very poor in nutrients. It's really largely gravel, harsh weather conditions, high winds. This is about half an hour away from Denver. The next slide is another slide of Andrew's.
Okay, this is one of the 3 mountain ranges that surrounds Athens. It's called Imitos or Hymettus in English. And again, it's very clear. You can see that it's there's no soil on this mountain. It's all rock and a little bit of maybe gravel, but there's no soil basically. So all of this, you see the forest there, the pine forest, and there's some oak there as well, is growing in rock basically. There's no soil. Again, a garrigue landscape.
The next slide is the last ecosystem that largely informs my green roof design, and that's the desert. This photograph was taken in Moab, Utah, which is the state right just west of Colorado. An incredibly, obviously dry landscape, but has some very beautiful plants. And I'm particularly growing more and more interested in cactus. And then Andrew has one more slide about our surroundings.
And here you can see the city of Athens from this Imitos mountain that we just saw from the other direction. So this is, as you can see also from here, the opposite mountain range, which is Bendeli. There are 3 mountain ranges, in other words, that surround Athens. And in the center, you can see the Acropolis and some other hills, which are also green. But again, it's this very rugged pine, garrigue sort of landscape.
So Andrew, let's continue and talk a little bit about plant material, because I know we're both very interested in that, and that we both really look at what's around us and study the natives and put them on the roof. So how has that sort of informed what you're putting on your roofs in Greece?
So we're looking primarily at putting things like aromatic herbs on roofs, things like thyme and lavender and rosemary, as we talked about, and lots of different sorts of thymes as well, and also dittany and savoury, and also succulents do well. You can see in this particular picture some mesembryanthemums and other wild flowers we also talked about earlier. Things like irises and cyclamens also do quite well.
The next slide also is yours. It looks like there's rosemary in the foreground.
Good. Yes, that's rosemary in the foreground, and you can see lavender there. You can also see some mints and some oreganum, some marjoram, some grasses. I don't know if you can quite see the irises there as well. So yeah, it's really a mixture of aromatic herbs, wildflowers, grasses, ground covers, and that sort of thing.
From my perspective, this was the first green roof I did, and this is in Denver. It was completed in 2007, and I really used a lot of natives and climate appropriate plants. I worked with Mark Fusco from Denver Botanic Gardens. But, like Andrew, I'm using alliums. I put Delosperma in there. I've got grasses. This is a springtime shot where you can't see that much. But the next slide shows you the top 2 beds, which are meant to reflect the prairie, have a lot of grasses, blue grama. There's a rabbit bush that somehow snuck in there. I've got an Asclepias, a butterfly weed. My soil is pretty deep, so I'm sort of fortunate on this green roof, unlike others I've done, that I've got a foot deep. So I'm really able to grow a lot of shrub-like perennials, like the Asclepias and the rabbit bush. but the grasses seem to be thriving. The next slide, Andrew, we were going to start talking about irrigation because that seems to be a critical factor in both of our working arenas, right?
Something that's really fascinated us from the beginning when we started doing research into this is how we can green a roof in Athens without using much water. So minimal to no irrigation if possible in the summer. So we did a number of experiments in different locations on different strategies and different methods of reducing irrigation down to a minimum. This is a particularly interesting case here. An experiment was done here. This is a hotel complex which has lots of green roofs on it, which were done about 12 years ago. And they were done by actually the hotel staff did them, the ground staff of the hotel did them. And they had a number of waterproofing problems 2 or 3 years ago. So they stopped irrigating, so all of the roofs died basically. And they called us in 2 years ago to look at what could be done without digging up all the roofs and replacing them and doing them from the beginning again. So we looked at this and we thought about how we could actually irrigate in a minimum way so that they wouldn't have problems with their waterproofing, but get some sort of something going again. And what we did was we watered this particular roof that you can see here in the foreground every 3 or 4 days for about 10, 15 minutes, something like that, in the beginning, in the first summer. And then as we went through the summer, we were increasing reducing the amount of water we were giving the roof, and also increasing the period in between waterings. And by the end of the first summer, I think we were at something like a week between waterings and only watering for 5 minutes. And then we turned off in September, and they carried on during the winter without irrigation. And then the following summer, we started at once a week with 5 minutes. And then over that second summer, we reduced watering down to once every 2 weeks with 5 minutes. And then in the third summer, we actually turned it off. And this is actually, I think, the third spring you can see here. So this is just coming out of the winter with no irrigation.
Andrew, well, how deep is the substrate?
The substrate in this particular roof is very, very deep. It's about 1 meter deep.
Oh, it's really deep. And what are those maroon plant flowers?
So they're called gauras.
Oh, I know what they are. Yeah, those are great. Huh. What about your next slide? What's going on there?
Right, so this is a really interesting roof because this wasn't irrigated from the beginning. As you can see, the idea here is to emulate and to copy really the surrounding ecosystem. You can see a garrigue ecosystem around the roofs. And this is very similar sort of, the roof is the same, a very similar sort of plant makeup. And the reason why this roof was never irrigated, although it's a very high-end villa thing here, the reason it was never irrigated was because in the first summer when it was installed, the timers were stolen. So it went through the first summer without any irrigation, and the second summer too. So this is without irrigation, and this is the second summer.
Wow.
And the substrate here, the depth of the substrate is about 10 centimeters.
Huh.
So it's very, very shallow.
Interesting, interesting. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this is a picture of a green roof that Mark Fusco did at Denver Botanic Gardens. He installed this roof when I was installing mine in 2007. And, you know, we had a lot of conversations about irrigation. I'm certainly still having them. Last night I was talking with Andy Creeth here in Boulder about what he's doing these days. But I know that, you know, here you can see in this image there's a lot of cactus, there's some pine leaf penstemon, there's some eriogonum in the background, and there's some artemisias in there that Mark, I think that he put in subsurface irrigation and then he overwatered it to establish, which is something that we do a lot here. Because water is so sensitive, we don't want to, our clients, and certainly if it's in a public place, and I'll go on to the next slide, they don't want to see water on a green roof. And so what we end up doing is putting the water underground and then just spraying it just to establish it, because we find that if we're planting by plugs or seed, it's impossible to establish with subsurface irrigation. These are some pretty this again. This is a Mark Fusco green roof. You see the agave in there and the yuccas, and he's really sort of experimenting with plants that would have different root systems and how they do. And they've thrived on this green roof with very little to no irrigation at all. Andrew, the next slide is yours. I think it's a view of the Acropolis.
Yes, this is right next to the Acropolis. This is in front of the theatre, the amphitheatre, which is at the foot of the Acropolis, on a building facing the theatre. So this is only watered actually by hand once a week by somebody. And so I think the real message that I'd like to get across, both of us I think want to get across, is that in Athens and in Denver, we've actually done a number of green roofs, quite a lot of green roofs, and we don't irrigate them. Or we irrigate them in the beginning and then once they're established, we reduce the amount of irrigation. So really, if it can be done in these very, very arid, hot places, I think it could be really done anyway. I mean, you could get away with no irrigation or very low irrigation pretty much anywhere if you can do it here. Going on, again, this is the Ministry of Finance in the centre of Athens, in Syntagma Square, in Constitution Square. This was irrigated in the beginning for the first year. And in the second year, again, we had a problem with the irrigation, with the plumber of the ministry. I mean, he actually turned off the watering, the irrigation system during the summer. So the second summer didn't get any irrigation at all. This is now 6 years later.
Wow.
And it's thriving. The roof is thriving without irrigation.
That's beautiful. So the next slide is mine, I think. And, again, what I want to point out, and Andrew and I have both done a lot of this, is, I walk constantly in the hills around Denver, and I'm looking at the soils and what they're like and the ecosystems and the plants that thrive and where they thrive. This is a shot in the spring. It's a field of blue penstemons. We have many, many different varieties of penstemons in Colorado. And although they're a short-lived plant, as you can see in the next slide, this is a green roof I did in Boulder, Colorado, outside of Denver. The client wanted a simple palette. It's just blue Grama grass and Penstemon mensarum, which is a blue mesa penstemon from the western slope. And even though they're sort of short-lived, if you don't deadhead them and let them go to seed, the next slide is a green roof that Andy Creeth of Greenroofs of Colorado installed in Denver. The plants will spread and seem to thrive on green roofs with very little to no irrigation. The next slide is yours, Andrew.
Another issue that we have in Greece, of course, is earthquakes, which means that our roofs have to be very light. So we can have very shallow substrates. And again, with very little irrigation, you can actually get successful ecosystems to develop. You can see a lot of succulents on this roof, sedum sediform, mesembryanthemum again, and some different sorts of sedums here. Not a very big fan of sedums, to be honest with you, but I think they are definitely useful in this particular climate, and especially when the roof has got a very, very shallow substrate. But should be mixed with other things, I think, not just not only sedums. The second slide there, you can see again a lot of aromatic herbs, so mints and thymes and rosemaries, dittany, and again a very shallow substrate. This is a substrate which is about 5 centimeters deep.
Wow.
And it's mainly a gravel substrate. Again, for lightness, to make the roof light, that's why the substrate is so shallow. And the roof survives and thrives with very little irrigation. In fact, there's hardly any irrigation now in the summer. And with quite a shallow substrate. It can be done, in other words.
Andrew, do you put organics in?
We do, yes. Our substrates are primarily and mainly mineral, but we do use some organic material, yes.
So speaking of shallow substrates, and the next slide from one of my walks, this is a Ponderosa pine that's growing in a very shallow rock, crack, and a crevice. And what's interesting is along those lines, in the next slides, you see another picture of the Denver Botanic Gardens where Mark Fusco was experimenting with depths of substrate. And here what he was able to do was to vary the substrate depending on whether he was point loading structural beams or the parapet walls. He could get taller. I think the substrate there was maybe a foot, maybe a little bit more. And in the most shallow areas, it was really 3 inches. But you can see in the background there, he's got a fern bush and some agaves. So he's really able to plant shrubs in green roofs and have them thrive and do quite well. Andrew, the next slide is yours.
What this picture really shows, I think, clearly is that a good strategy to reduce and to make your irrigation as little as possible is to get good ground cover, or as Karla said, green cover, as it's called in the States. So obviously this maintains moisture levels, so you can reduce the amount that you irrigate. Also, you can see in the next slide, again, very good ground cover. So the better the ground cover, the more moisture can be retained in the substrate, so the less you need to irrigate.
I also find it sort of, if you can get it invasive enough, it sort of keeps out the weeds too. It's interesting.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. The next slide, we wanted to talk about plant choices, or just our five or several favorite plants that we use. This for me has become a real star in my green roofs. This is called a Chelopsis linearis, or a desert willow. I was curious to see one at Paul Kephardt's nursery at Rana Creek, because Patrick Blanc had put it in a green wall at the Drew School in San Francisco. This is a plant that's native to southwestern United States. It grows in the seeps of the deserts, obviously with incredibly little water, but it has these very then lush, tropical-like blooms that you see in this picture are attracting a big bumblebee. The next slide I have is again of my museum roof, and you see the Chelopsis in the foreground, but the plant I really wanted to point out is down there at the bottom in the shade. And the common name is called mountain lover. The Latin name is Penstemon cannabii. It grows in dry shade under blue spruces and just spreads and spreads and spreads and requires no water at all. And I know to a large extent our green roofs are really highly exposed to sun for a lot of hours, but we do have areas in green roofs that are in the shade, and this is a really particularly great plant to play around with. The next slide is of Andrew's, of a house.
Right, this is the hotel complex again, which we're sort of restoring the roofs. And in terms of plant choice, you can see a lot of grasses here, and also, again, aromatic herbs and rosemary in the background there, in the background of the first roof, anyway. And so, yeah, aromatic herbs again. These are deep substrates, as we said, and the way that we're bringing them back is the similar regime that we talked about over 2 years, trying to re-establish cover, basically, growth again. And the next picture, you can see the garrigue landscape in the background and the attempt at the garrigue landscape on the roof as well. We've also added some gowers there for show, really. The people who own the building, the clients, asked for something that was pretty showy at the front. So you can see the gowers there. But the idea here was also not only to have a very showy roof at the front, but also to have it merging into the background and the surrounding ecosystem.
In the next slide, there is my museum roof again, and one of my goals on that roof was to have it be evergreen, have an evergreen aesthetic without using conifers. So what you see here is you see a Dianthus anatolicus, and then right behind it is what's called an acantholyman. Both of these plants are climate appropriate. They are from either the steppes of the Caucasus Mountains, or they're from the steppes of China. We've had wonderful horticulturists here like Panayiotis Kaulides from Denver Botanic Gardens and Mark Fusco be able to travel to far-off places to bring these plants back that work terrifically well in our ground landscapes, and what I'm finding work really well in low to no irrigation green roofs. The next slide is another winter image of the same bed but looking up. And the plant that I have really grown to love, and I saw a lot of it in Bill Adams' nursery last weekend in Pueblo, is that dianthus that you see in the middle ground. It's a Lawrence Crocker. I'm not dianthus. It's a Daphne. And it's an alpine Daphne, and they're low growing in their spreads, and there are all sorts of varieties, and it has this wonderful evergreen sensibility all winter. I think this is around in January, and then in the spring has this incredibly lovely bloom where the bloom lasts for weeks, and it's very aromatic. In the background, you also see an eriogonum. At the top of the bed, again, that acantholyman and the dianthus anatolicus. Andrew, the next slide is yours.
So again, here you can really see the idea of getting very good thick ground cover so we can reduce the amount of irrigation. So we've got lots of moisture being retained in the green roof. The next slide, I'd like to go on to we were going to talk about substrates.
Yeah.
Again, this is a very shallow substrate, a very mineral substrate, very little organic matter, I would say about 5% organic matter. The rest is mineral.
Wow.
And you can see it's very aromatic. We've got oregano in the foreground, along with, on the right-hand side of the picture, rosemary. You can see lavenders and mints in the background. A very shallow substrate, and mainly mineral substrate.
In mine, I had, at the museum, I think it was 10% organic, 90% inorganic expanded shale. Here you see an allium with a Delosperma in the background. In the next slide, you see a lot of a puncha cactus, and the other thing that we've been doing in our green roofs is to use annuals, to overseed with annuals. And you see that little blue flower, it's called a California bluebell, and that really spreads wonderfully. But this garden is now almost 8 years old, and we're really not fertilizing it anymore. We've just sort of let it go on its own. So we're not even top dressing with organics. Andrew, the next slide is yours.
So yes, again, we're doing something very similar in terms of annuals. You can see lots of annuals here, and grasses particularly. And things like poppies we have, and clovers. And again, you can see this attempt really to merge the green roof into the surrounding landscape. In the background, you can see the landscape, which is the garrigue, which is with the pistachia on the left-hand side of the background. And again, quite a shallow substrate. It becomes deeper towards the surrounding ecosystem.
Are you irrigating this one, Andrew?
This is the one that has not been irrigated because the clocks were stolen in the
first year.
Great. So it was never irrigated, no.
That's great.
So this was seeded with annuals, and also we used plugs and more larger plants as well.
Huh.
The next one is, I think, a classic photograph of the aromatic species that we use. You can see in the middle of the picture, in the center of the picture, oreganum and marjoram. Then on either side of that, you can see the beautiful thymes. Then you can see a lovely lavender there. And it's all interspersed with ground cover, things like helichrysum, drosanthemums, and mesembryanthemums. It's a beautiful example of what we're talking about in terms of aromatic plants there.
Andrew, are those Delospermas, those pink ones too?
Delosperma, yes, as well.
And they do well on your roofs?
They do very well indeed, yes.
Yeah, sometimes they do well on ours, and sometimes they really sort of shrink back. It depends on the exposure. It's interesting. The next slide, I just wanted to show a close-up. This is on Mark Fusco's DBG, Denver Botanic Gardens roof, of the cactus when they come into bloom. And you see that acantholyman in the background with its halo of a bloom, which also lasts a long time. In the next slide, we're back to the roof garden on the Museum of Contemporary Art. In a springtime shot, you see that eriogonum, that sulfur flower, going crazy on the roof, and a little bit of the dianthus in the lower left-hand corner. And then, Andrew, the next slide, I see some grasses on your roof.
Yeah, and again you can see the rosemary in the background, the Delosperma, and the Drosanthemums, also some sedums that are coming up through the growth there. And in the next slide, again the same thing. Emphasis on getting very good thick ground cover so that we can get moisture retention during the summer without irrigation, or with little irrigation.
Is this roof irrigated?
Sparsely by hand by the municipality, and the municipality are not really very sort of keen on doing it because it has to be done outside hours, outside working hours.
Right.
So it's sparsely irrigated.
The next slide is one of my favorite plants that I use in green roofs from Colorado to California, and that's the blue grama grass, the Bouteloua gracilis, which I find really works well in green roofs of varying substrates. One thing that I wanted to mention about the whole irrigation question, in talking with my colleagues around here, we were for a while using drip tape that was made by Kiss, which is an Australian company, and I just found out last night that Kiss is no longer making it in Colorado, which was a shame because it was, unlike Netafim, it wasn't just percolating down. The structure of the drip tape was allowing, depending on how much organics you had in your substrate, for upward and a lot of lateral percolation, which was really helping. But I do want to mention too that the more we push this, the better off we are. This green roof in the museum, sometimes we don't turn on the irrigation until August, if at all. And, then it'll go all winter without being watered whatsoever. The last slide is just an image of a green roof that Andy Creeth installed with a lot of prairie grasses, a lot of Bouteloua and other ones. And it's a wonderful sort of winter shot. And this is what sort of our surrounding prairies look like. So there you go. That's what we have for you. We wanted to give you our contact information and our websites. We can be reached in various places. And Andrew, I wanted to just hear from you again. It's interesting talking to you because I felt like when we started this, I felt like we were so much further apart than we really are now, and that the possibilities, if we're working in an alpine or arid prairie, high altitude arid prairie climate like Denver or Athens, we can still sort of aim for the same thing. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the message that I would really like sort of people to go away with. That it can be done. I mean, you can reduce your irrigation down to a minimum and even turn, sort of irrigation off completely. Once a plant community has been established on a roof after, let's say, 2 years, really they can live without water for the summer. It's possible. It's feasible. And that's really the message, that if it can be done in a place like Denver or in Athens, I think it can be done pretty much anywhere.
And I think we're now getting our track record. I know, we're looking at roofs here that are anywhere, getting to be 10 years old, which I know is nothing compared to Switzerland or Germany, but we are seeing a track record of these plants surviving on low to no irrigation. How about you?
Likewise here. I mean, we now have roofs that are 10 years old, exactly.
Yeah.
And a little bit older, actually, 12-year-old roofs as well, which have survived without any irrigation from the beginning.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the first roofs that we did in 2002, which is now it'll be 13 years old this summer, without any irrigation from day one. So yes, and that's surviving. Well, it's thriving.
Yeah, that's terrific. Great. Well, thank you so much for pulling this together with me. I really appreciate our conversation, our dialogue, and it means a lot to me.
Thank you too, Karla. Good talking to you.
Yes, we'll talk soon. Bye.
Thank you to Karla and everyone who watched our talk on Waterwise green roofing in Denver and Athens. Interestingly, for the last week it hasn't stopped raining here, which is really unusual but also most welcomed. I hope you'll go away with some ideas from what we said, and I particularly hope that more green roofers will try to reduce the amount that they irrigate. After all, if it can be done in hot, arid Denver and Athens, it should be able to be done anywhere.
Hi, it's you again. You didn't fall asleep? You're still there? I hope you enjoyed it. We did. We have a lot of fun talking and arguing and figuring things out, Andrew and I. And we've come up with more similarities than differences, and it's been a really rich and valuable relationship that we're happy to share with you. So enjoy the rest of the conference. I hope you learn a lot, and I've got a lot of dishes to do, so I got to get back to them. Bye!